Chapter 4 is about self-directed learning, and it starts out by discussing the fact that most adults are engaged. In fact, I think it makes some quote about 90% of adults are engaged in some sort of informal learning project at any one time. And while you are involved in a formal setting right now, not an informal one, most of the time adults will have a variety of projects going, things that they're learning about. This chapter talks about monitoring that and in some ways being able to leverage that as folks working in the area of adult education or facilitating learning. So it starts out by talking about integration and monitoring of self-directed learning. And it states that it's a decision to engage in lifelong learning, which is the hallmark of adult learning. Those of you who are working with secondary students and those of you who are parents, this is a goal oftentimes, especially in Western cultures, that we are encouraging some sort of independence, some way to emancipate you by becoming a lifelong learner, to be able to make your own decisions and make your own way. And so from a Western perspective, lifelong learning is a good thing, and it is typical of adult learning, at least in our culture. Taking control of your learning then is really the center part of it, keeping in mind that this is all intrinsic motivation for the most part. It's intentionally sought learning because you have some sort of burning question, something you need the answer to. Remember the immediacy of the 6 assumptions of adult learning, and we are being motivated typically to meet a certain need, a question that we have. We tend to plan our learning. We schedule it out. We're taking control of it. If we're self-directed, I need to know this step, this step, this step, or I'm going to do this, this, and this, and then I'm going to sail the boat, whatever it might be. And they give some good examples in the text. We take responsibility for our learning. In other words, it's nobody else's fault if something didn't get done. And of course, you set your own self-imposed deadlines, if you will, and you take responsibility when those aren't met. And sometimes it can become a psychological problem where people might say, I was going to do this and I'm such a procrastinator and I didn't do it. And then it becomes a point of psychosis and all kinds of other things take place. But for the most part, you take responsibility for your learning. And when you don't meet those goals, you readjust because it's something that you're doing as a personal pursuit. We are then in control of that learning. It is a personal pursuit. And then we also, as the learner, we evaluate the outcome. Did I sail that boat across the lake? Did I actually meet my expected outcome or objective that I had? Now, Knoll's definition of self-directed learning in this chapter states this: when individuals take the initiative, with or without the help of others, in diagnosing their learning needs, formulating their learning goals, identifying human and material resources for learning, choosing and implementing appropriate learning strategies, and evaluating those outcomes, that's when we have self-directed learning. And pretty much as just a recap of how we take control of our learning that I put up here above. So integrating a self-directed learning, and you'll hear me say SDL, I almost paused there, but I wanted to say it out loud, self-directed learning in informal and formal settings. Now, you might be saying to yourself, how can it be self-directed in formal settings? And I'll have that conversation here as we go along. But our goal as educators or facilitators, and sometimes you got to say, so where's that line? When I was writing this down, I thought, so where is the line between an educator and a facilitator? Oftentimes in adult education, if they're bringing a lot of prior knowledge to a situation, you are really facilitating their learning. You're putting whatever the new concept is out there, and you're structuring in a way that they're going to take their experiences, relate that, kind of construct the learning. They're going to have an activity, they're going to do a discussion, whatever it might be, and you are facilitating that conversation. You are facilitating that learning. You're bringing closure at the end of that discussion or at the end of that activity. You're doing the synthesis of what took place or the summary. That's a little bit more facilitation. As we talk about it being educators, that's actually more of in a situation where you are delivering maybe a lot more content. You are connecting that a lot more content to a particular problem that they're investigating, and so you are delivering. You are bringing more. They don't have the understanding, the prior experiences that are going to help so much bring about the new concept. You are delivering a whole bunch of new content. So that's maybe the difference there. But the goal then in self-directed learning for this would be to develop the self-directed learner. Do that by modeling and by practice. So when I say especially those of you in secondary and you're working with younger people, to give them that practice, you might model what that looks like for them. And then you turn them loose to say, okay, here are the six things that need to be accomplished, and you go back to those steps and you put yourself through. I'm gonna structure my own learning. I'm gonna structure my own assessment, so on and so forth, so that the learner gets a little bit of practice as they become lifelong learners and move into that transition between adolescence and adult. The next item here would be use the process of furthering to further facilitate learning. So, in other words, if you can leverage that self-directed learning piece by saying, okay, these are some concepts you need to investigate to better understand that. They then draw on their own experiences, that being their strengths and their weaknesses, and then they go and they learn a little bit more from a variety of resources that they might have available, and that facilitates more learning. It's kind of like being on the internet and you're investigating a topic and there's a link there that's really interesting or a word that you don't understand, and I call it going down the rabbit hole, the Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole. But sometimes you find some gem or you learn a lot more because of those hyperlinked texts. I think that's some of the power inside of the internet. And unlike some of you, I can remember the days before it. And when we first saw hyperlinked text and the ability to not just define terms, which that's what they were originally, you'd click on it, it would give you the definition for the word. But then going forward, it was that not only that, it would take you to a website. Within that website, it would give you a whole bunch of other details and movies. Take, for example, Google. When Google has some major event on the web page, somebody's birthday, somebody died, some sort of historical something took place on a particular date, they'll put a little graphic and you click on that and you can learn tons more about that. That ability to kind of dig down and go down a rabbit hole, if you will, really facilitates learning. It's my self-direction. I'm interested in that concept. I want to click on it. I want to go learn more, and off I go. The next thing that your text talks about is Clardy's types of self-directed learning projects. And I like the examples they gave in here. I believe it was a blood pressure or something like that. But induced is when somebody comes to you and you feel like you get some sort of pressure that you need to know this for a certain reason. Now, they give you a pretty good non-formal example there, but in this case, if you've got high blood pressure, it's induced. I need to find out about it so I can control it and not die. It might be induced in such a way that your boss comes and says, you know, this is a new area for us and you really don't know that much about it. I'd really like you to get yourself up to speed, do whatever it takes to be able to understand this concept. That's induced. Synergistic might be it happens in some sort of synergy. You happen to know somebody that has a skill that you don't have, and you're able to help them. You're able to engage with them through your self-directed learning to learn about that. For example, I had a neighbor who said, I don't know how to put up corn. And I said, I'm putting up corn on Saturday. And she said, oh, that's great. I said, come along and I'll show you how to cut corn off a cob and put it in a bag and freeze it. But that's synergistic types of learning. Voluntary is when you kind of like volunteer, you set it out, you know exactly what it is that you want to learn, and you take the steps to do it. So voluntary learning might be, I really like pottery. I collect a lot of pottery. I go to these art shows and I think it's the most beautiful stuff, but really my house is getting pretty full of pottery. What I really should do, what I really want to be able to do, is take a course in pottery making and make my own, and then maybe I can give them away, sell them to friends, whatever it might be. So that voluntary type training is where you say, I'm going to have some self-directed learning on my own. I'm volunteering for it. I'm signing myself up. It's completely self-directed in a voluntary way. It's not connected in a synergistic way, and it's not being induced upon me. Scanning self-directed learning is actually, I think, easier to do in the 21st century than ever before. What that's a little bit more about is, let's say, for example, I'm interested in a variety of topics, but I can put those interests in on things like Twitter. In terms of research, I'm interested in college and career readiness. I'm interested in agricultural literacy. I can set up alerts. I can join listservs. I can get notifications when a new piece of research comes out. I can be tweeted about it. And that's scanning, or I can subscribe to newsletters that come to my inbox every day, which they do, and I can scan the titles there. That's scanning. That's putting myself in a situation where I'm going to get the information I've requested based on my interests, and I'm going to be able to scan that and then add that to my learning. When I see something really interesting, I can delve right into it, and then I'll be clicking madly and going down the rabbit hole of learning. But that's a little bit about clarity and the types of self-directed learning projects. There's 4 types. So if you're engaged in some sort of self-directed learning right now, you might say to yourself, which one am I? Is it something that's being induced, or is it voluntary? I wanted to learn how to knit, whatever it might be. So Caffarella's goals of self-directed learning, and as I read these, I really think they're motivators. You decide. But aspiration to gain knowledge or develop skills, to me, that's a motivation for self-directed learning, and they call it goals. Okay. Become more self-directed in the learning. In other words, you are more that you learn about it, the more you focus in on various topics. The next one was inspire transformational learning. So that's kind of that intrinsic. And next week, when you read the chapter on transformational learning, this might become a little bit more clear. But it inspires the idea from that internal motivation that I don't want to do the same thing the same way again. And so it's something that's going to transform you, and you are looking for that kind of experience, so to speak, through your self-directed learning. Emancipatory, I already mentioned that. That means that you can have some autonomy, and that by learning that you can emancipate yourself from a situation and move on to some other type of goal that you might have. So they mark those as goals. I'd say they're, to me, really linked in as motivators. So some myths now, and I think your book outlines 10 myths by Brockett here, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to pick, I think I picked 4 or 5 here that really resonate with me. Obviously I recommend you read them all, but these are a few that I wanted to comment on. Myth number 3, self-directed learning is the best approach for adults. I also agree with Brockett. I don't think this is the best approach. I took a course where we just did learning contracts. I think I've mentioned this before, and it was pretty much just our own self-direction, tell me what you're going to do to earn these credits on adult education. But because I was such a novice in that area and had only been a secondary educator, I thought to myself, well, I don't even really know where to start. So I needed a little bit more of a formal structure, if you will, to really be able to learn that content. So it's not always the best approach. Sometimes you're so novice that you need some structure to it. Myth number 4 was self-directed learning is limited primarily to white middle-class adults. That was something that's been discussed by some critics of Knowles in particular, in that that's the way white middle-class people tend to learn. But your text makes a pretty good argument for no, this is a way that lots of people are learning, especially with the event of mobile devices, phones in their pockets that can get them out to the World Wide Web to answer questions or to engage in any other kind of learning. Many people across the globe take entire online courses through their cell phone. So it's not really limited that way, although there may be some access issues in certain cultures. Myth 6, activities are limited to reading and writing. No, not necessarily. I think an experiential week, you want to learn how to canoe, you're not going to, those kinds of activities for self-directed learning, or you want to learn how to sail, you might say to yourself, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to go sail. So those are the kinds of things that they're not limited to reading and writing. Myth 7 is facilitating self-directed learning is an easy way out for teachers. It seemed that way to me when a teacher just gave me a learning contract and said, here, go about doing this. But truly, if a teacher does this and you have enough prior knowledge, you're not a novice learner, and you're going to engage in self-directed learning, there's a lot of work for a teacher or a facilitator on the front end to make sure that all the resources that you need to be successful are available. And that it's not, in some cases, Google can be painful in this way because there's so many resources that you like, where do I start? So I think a teacher or facilitator in this area might really have to do a lot more work on the front end, and then that formative assessment, helping that learner, guiding them through the learning as they're going through that self-directed project more as a mentor. So I think that also is a myth. Myth 10, self-directed learning will erode the quality of institutional programs. That is a myth. I like when students do self-directed learning. When someone says, hey, I saw something on one of the websites that you gave me, and I went and I took that survey, or I looked at that link, or I read that article. I feel like I have done something really positive to not just motivate them, but to further facilitate their lifelong learning. And so I think that is completely bogus, and it is absolutely a myth. I love the fact that students go out and engage in self-directed learning. If anything, that makes my job easier. Process of self-directed learning. Back to slide 2, where we just talked a little about those links and where Knowles talks about kind of the steps of self-directed learning. This chapter talks about the PPC model: person, process, and context, which I believe started also in chapter 12. And this is a bit where they talk about to find out whether you are at that level to be a self-directed learner. You can take the continuing learning inventory, and I've provided that link here. And also it is a link that is, let's see if I can open it really quick. Here we go. You can take this if you have time. I'm not requiring it. I think that probably if you are in this graduate program and you've achieved and been able to get into graduate school, that you have quite a bit of self-directed learning, because to get here actually takes quite a bit of effort on a learner's part. So what is self-directed learning readiness scale? How is it developed, and so forth. And then they have the questions that help you with, hey, am I a self-directed learner? So that's just one of the resources that they talk about in your text. Measures of readiness for self-directed learning then would be, and this is what's in that scale: initiative, independence, learning persistence, responsibility taking, self-discipline, curiosity, independence in enjoyment of learning, goal setting, and problem solving orientation. In fact, if you can provide and kind of help facilitate those kinds of measures, those are the measures that are going to make you a self-directed learner, and help you to engage in lifelong learning, which again is part of the Western culture for emancipation and being an independent person who's has their own independent life, but also contributing to society, which is talked about in the other article I give you this week. Self-directed learning correlation to high self-efficacy. Obviously, if you are a self-directed learner, you say to yourself, I have the ability to. That's really what self-efficacy is all about. I have the ability to. So methods for SDL integration. So here are some ways that you can help with the modeling and the process. You can use some technology tools to engage students with new skills. You can use some virtual learning experiences, YouTube, some sort of simulations, those kinds of things, to get them engaged and kind of broaden their perspective, if you will, on learning different things. And YouTube, virtual learning environments, these kinds of things will help them be exposed to some new concepts. And like I said before, like the internet, it's like everything is so well linked. You can just continue. It's almost like, I think I saw a commercial once that said, I've reached the end of the internet. No, you haven't. I don't know. There is no end to the internet. Social media, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Google Wikis, polls, etc. are ways to engage. Remember that scanning technique. Open education resources. These are tutorials. You can find what that is just open resources for you to access that are like, let me think of one, Photoshop. I really need to have some more skills in the area of Photoshop. And one of these days I'm going to make a little bit more time, because all of those tutorials are online and they're sequenced. Right now, when I need to know how to do something, I go and I Google it and I just find that little snippet. It's pretty much out of context and it gets me by that day. And I'm lucky if I remember it till the next time that I do it. But those kinds of resources are all over the web for learning. So MOOCs, and then by that there's a few in here, XMOOCs, CMOOCs, and VMOOCs, are the kinds of instructional settings that are online, massively online, open courses that adults can engage in. They are not formal, meaning that they're not graded, but when they have an X in front of them, it's offered through an institution that typically would be considered formal. So their courses, for example, MIT has had some open and they've been doing experiments. In fact, at one point I read about a course that something like 10,000 people had enrolled in. Self-directed, go through the modules yourself. You still engage in discussions. You really have to be motivated to get through it, but I was seeing something like a 9% completion rate on some of those massively open courses that were offered from formal institutions, but non-formal because they're not graded. The CMOOCs are more of like blogs and wikis. They are not typically offered by a formal institution, but they definitely have all those pieces or resources to help you in a more of a community, why the C is there, a community MOOC, to get you through that content and get at the concepts that you're trying to learn. The VMOOC, primarily this type of MOOC, massively online, open online course, it was talked about, well, is it possible to teach vocational skills through online settings? And of course, we sit here and we say to ourselves, well, for example, can I learn how to weld? And some folks are saying, no, that's going to be something that's tactile, it's experiential, they're going to have to do it. Others are saying, well, I think that we can give them a VMOOC experience where we don't have to have them doing it in front of us, but we can provide the resources. They can make a movie of them doing the particular activity, and we'd have a pretty good idea. In addition to that, now you might see virtual reality type things where these like Oculus, or it started with Google Cardboard glasses, where you have 3D way of looking at something. There's some folks investigating how to do surgeries with these 3D virtual reality types of lenses that they can learn the different procedures for doing surgery. And I've also seen them talked about with the Oculus product, which is another 3D virtual reality kind of thing, learning how to weld. They already have simulators, obviously, for flying a plane, which are not quite virtual reality, but they're a little 2D in that regard. They're actually 3D, but they don't have the virtual reality where you can change perspective and move your head around like some of the virtual realities. So this is a question then for reflection, and I'm using Poll Everywhere, so I'd like you to respond at Poll Everywhere, and I will discuss this in my reflection for the week. But do you think that self-directed learning can be used in formal adult educational settings? And so the way to respond here is you either go on your computer to pollev, doesn't have to be capitalized, just pollev.com/spielmaker. And then you'll be able to vote yes or no. Or if you want to use your mobile phone, text in your keyword to, so this is who the to is, and then in your message you'll put this number if you vote yes. If you vote no, you'll put this number. So this is the to person. This would be like having the person's name. I guess my name is 37607, and then this would be the message that you're sending. And then I'll take a look and see what you all think. Do you think self-directed learning can be used in a formal adult education setting? I mean, in some regard, you say it's self-directed, but how is that possible to be used in a formal setting? And then we'll come back. This is just a tool that I want you to kind of play with if you haven't played with polls before. And I know that some of you have used Socrative and Doodle polls maybe, but this one's Poll Everywhere. So in terms of measuring self-directed learning, your text comes up with some learner measures. And this is some of the ways in Table 4.2 to look at measurement. And they talk about being self-managed, self-monitoring, and self-modifying. It's not one or the other. It's just if we're managing ourselves, monitoring ourselves, and if we're modifying that, all of those things put together enhance the self-directed learning. So if you just pulled one out of here, produces new knowledge through own research and experimentation. That's definitely would be, a goal. It's self-managing. If a person manages self in relation to a group, that would be self-monitoring. And in this case, continues to learn new skills and strategies. That would be self-modifying. So they've really just categorized a lot of the different, I guess, hallmarks, if you will, of measuring your self-directedness into these categories of managing, monitoring, and modifying. And of course, the goal would be that if you are really a lifelong learner, that you would be in all of these categories. So how well did you evaluate your desired outcome? That was something they talked about. How did you do that? Did you sail that boat across, or did you have some sort of failure, come back to the dock, do some sort of formative assessment, figure out what went wrong, and then went back out or continued to figure out what it might have been to get across that lake? So how did you evaluate your desired outcome? Badging is something I've talked about before in some evaluation assessment courses. It's somewhat new, even though it's been around for probably at least 4 years. And the idea of badging is that a badge is created by somebody who can give you some sort of certification or endorsement. Let's say I went through that Photoshop course and I went through all the tutorials and I was able to create something at the end of that module, and each time I did, I submitted it, and somebody or in some way it's evaluated as yes, you knew how to do that, or maybe it's a class in code, yes, you know how to write that code. After I'd gone through all those modules and checked off everything, at the end I'd be rewarded with a badge. And that is, you might say it's a motivation, external motivation, but it's internally motivating because I want to get that badge, right? I want to earn that badge because that signifies something I know that I can present to others. And so badging is somewhat of a new idea when it comes to adult education, because we've seen badging primarily with kids. We've seen badging in Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and badging for adults in terms of computer use and those kinds of things is relatively new. Now, I do know that NOCTI, the organization who's been doing certifications for things like welding and automotive and really all the areas of CTE, has brought on badging, and they're working with Penn State to have badges and certifications in each one of those areas. And when you take the test, in addition to saying I passed, instead of getting a certificate that you might lose or get wadded up, you would get an electronic badge, and that badge would be kind of like, if you know anything about Google Wallet, it would go into your badging portfolio. And then as it's an electronic portfolio, when you go to get your job, you're able to present, I have a badge. They're authentic because they're kind of like dollars. When you hold a $100 bill or something up to the light and they can see certain things inside there they're looking for and watermarks and all of that. Badging is very much like that. They have embedded code into the badge that authenticates it. So badging is another way that a person could show an outcome or measure that they have acquired a particular skill. So if you're not familiar with it, it's new, you're intrigued by it, do some self-directed learning, Google badging, and you can learn lots more. I've actually seen it integrated with content management systems at the secondary level, where teachers, it's almost like a grade book, and students earn badges as they go along and so forth. So that's just another way to have a learner measure. And it could be self-directed or it can be external from a facilitator or a teacher. Learning contracts is another way. Obviously, on the learning contract, you would have already put down what your desired objective or outcome was, and you would basically be looking at that to see, did I get it done? And page 81 has an example of that. In fact, a learning contract is the last assignment in this course, and so you'll have some more experience with it. Assessing self-directed learning. There's facilitator assessment. That's where you decide and do an evaluation. And there's, of course, multiple ways to evaluate: pencil and paper, some sort of performance, some sort of discussion, whatever it is that you want the person to do. Facilitator assessment. You can do that through learning contracts. Did it get checked off? Did the educational outcome that was put forward actually get accomplished? Website analytics. Let's say that you had a badging type of system, or you had modules that you can monitor. You can go see if the student actually went through that, how many times they were on the page. That actually is something we can do inside of Canvas, is we can analyze, use web analytics inside of Canvas. And of course, if you've built some sort of other web page, you can use Google Analytics to see where your users came from, how long they were on the page, what pages they accessed, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of electronic ways to track folks if something's online. Logs and journals are a way. If through the learning you've been keeping some sort of log or some sort of journal about your activities, and I should have put blogs here too, electronic journals or activities, that's another way to assess the learning. Checklists, that's just a simple yes, no, really not much more. And some content lends itself to a checklist, others has varying degrees of how well it was accomplished, so that's when you see rubrics. Rubrics are about the varying degrees of success in a project, where checklist is pretty much yes you can or no you can't, and you get to decide by the content if it's a yes, no, or if it's something that at 80% accuracy this person can do this. There's some things that we really don't want just 80% accuracy. We want something that's 100%. And I think that we can all think of those. I think I've given the example of an appendectomy. I want to make sure that that's been checked off. Yes, they can perform it. Questionnaires. That'd be self-report, obviously, but it gives you some idea about their perception of how well they're able to do something for self-directed learning. And then, of course, observation and performance, successfully meeting or exceeding the expectations that there might be for that particular content. Finally, in the reading I gave you from the Techniques article, which is the CTE magazine, there's this graphic. And at first, I really puzzled at it as to where to start. But this is the impact and integration of monitoring in informal learning. It's just nice that there was an article in there about informal learning. But down here, you have the student, and this is the place that I started to figure it out. But here you'd have formal learning, informal, using informal methods, and motivate informal learning. And here on the left side, they have organizational education, self-motivated learning, organizational education, organizational rewards. And this is just one model for looking at the impact of integrating and monitoring, or assessing, if you will, self-directed types of learning. So in their thought, the authors here were saying you've got the student and you're going to get very large knowledge and skill acquisition if at first they start out with some sort of formal learning, and that might be where we're more the teacher, less of the facilitator. We present a bunch of brand new content. It's usually typically in a setting of organizational type of educational setting. Then from there, a student moves on and decides to engage in more self-directed learning. It's more informal, take some additional classes, have some additional outside experiences on their own time, so to speak, away from a formal setting. They're self-motivated by this. They got just enough here that they're like, I want to learn more. And then moving on up, again, maybe coming back and using some more informal methods from an organizational sense until you get up here where they're completely motivated through this informal learning process, and there may be some organizational rewards. And those rewards may not be just organizational, even though it presents it that way, but I think that they are also those rewards of I met my outcome. This is what I was really wanting to do anyway. And here on the right side, where they talk about societal growth, this is definitely from the Western culture perspective, in that we have emancipation, you become far more independent, you have a lot more autonomy, and that is really something that we value here in the West. And so finally, in self-directed learning, there's value in cultural context. And in fact, Brockett and Hemstra say this: it is a misconception to assume that learners necessarily enter a learning experience with a high level of self-direction already intact. Self-direction is not a panacea for all problems associated with adult learning, nor is it always necessary for one to be highly self-directed in order to be a successful learner. However, if being able to assume greater control for one's own destiny is a desirable goal of adult education, and we believe it is, then a role for educators of adults is to be able to help learners become increasingly able to assume personal responsibility for their own learning. Within the Western context is a really important societal goal.